Hello, welcome to this week's Let It Hatch, which focuses on Big Magic and again, The Artist's Way. These are a really good pairing with Elizabeth Gilbert saying on the back of The Artist's Way, "This book has been around for a long time, and I hope it sticks around forever. It guides the reader through a fascinating and fun 12-week-long program of exercise and explorations that help loosen up our artistic self." You can read the rest of her high praise for yourself as I explain the journey on which we're going today. Throughout part 1, John works on pruning his Globe Theatre, within and to some extent about which Lynn just delivered this poem.
Metamorphism, axes wielding, saws cutting, a tree felled, death of a living organism, log splitting, exposing unseen natural contours, carving, sculpting, shaving, hidden figure evolving, head, shoulders, arms, chest, fire pit, heating, flaming, smoking, turning, burning, cracking, charring, sighing, smouldering, dousing, steaming, cooling, changing vegetable to mineral, a new man standing.
After sharing some highlights from the discussions that John and I had about The Artist's Way, I'll invite him to join me where the war table used to be. With the help of Elizabeth Gilbert, I'll be asking him the two big questions for this week. 1, does nature love you back? And 2, do you believe in magic? Part 2 is nice and short. You'll remember Sue said this about walking in my interview with her about The Artist's Way.
When I used to first go for my daily walk, I found on my daily walk was when I had any creative ideas.
Setting the scene for the next 2 weeks of Into the Field, called Channels and Fresh Bread, Part 2 consists of some clips from walks with Sue, in which she thinks about, feels and shares her experiences of good orderly directional flow.
Did you know about the mushroom circle over there?
As we've learnt this week, Lynn believes in magic, and what's more, she's of the opinion that the Into the field is a magical field.
It's definitely a magic field.
In part 3, she'll take me and John on a journey to discover quite how, and I'll quiz him a little bit more about magic and nature in light of that.
I'm not sure I'm convinced yet that it's magic.
And finally, in part 4, a new assistant will help me as I give an overview of my favourite section, the section on trust from Big Magic, focusing specifically on trickster energy. Before plunging into part 1, I'll leave you with a visual aid and Gilbert's assertion that in order to let go of the addiction to creative suffering, you must reject the way of the martyr and embrace the way of the trickster. Despite its partially pruned change of form, I'm sure you recognize this as the apple tree. I'm grateful for this apple tree for helping us draw a contrast back in week 1 between surrendering fruit and the kind of surrender that might occur on the field of battle. Today I'm grateful for Lynn for helping us appreciate how this field might be magical, and for Elizabeth Gilbert for the same. But first, more on my gratitude for this tree. There's a really great chapter of Big Magic called Does It Love You?, which regards Elizabeth Gilbert's friend Robin Wall Kimmerer, a botanist and an author who teaches environmental biology, as you can see. Her students are all fervent young environmentalists, earnest as can be, desperate to save the planet. At the beginning of each semester, Robin asks her students 2 questions. The first question is, do you love nature? Every hand in the room goes up. The second question is, do you believe that nature loves you in return? Every hand in the room goes down. Ancient people did not see it this way, needless to say. Our ancestors always operated with a sense of being in a reciprocal emotional relationship with their physical surroundings. Robin believes that modern people have lost that sense of conversation, lost that awareness of the earth communicating with us just as much as we are communicating with it. As Robin puts it, the exchange of love between earth and people calls forth the creative gifts of both, The earth is not indifferent to us, but rather calling for our gifts in return for hers, the reciprocal nature of life and creativity. Or to put it more simply, nature provides the seed, man provides the garden. Each is grateful for the other's help. Some big magic just happened when I was up that ladder. No spoilers, you'll find out exactly what in week 10. If you have 3 hours to kill, any time between now and then the full interviews with Sue and John regarding The Artist's Way are now up on the YouTube channel. In the meantime, much of the content for the next 3 weeks will be framed by fragments from those interviews, such as this.
Possibly I've accidentally woke up from the suppression that she's referring to.
How did this accident occur for you?
Well, just by things like discovering that the techniques I've picked up to manage hedgerows and woodlands have an aesthetic aspect all of their own, and that you can trip into consequences that are creative as a consequence, just by exploring the techniques. I think I sort of stumbled into being creative by allowing instincts to take over a bit.
But both of these things are important to you.
Yeah.
Making sure that the good plan is implemented and the flow of creativity that you also...
Probably good implementation doesn't leave much scope for creativity, because creativity sort of suggests departures from the path you're on, pausing for thought, all that kind of stuff, whereas implementing is more to do with get the job done. A lot of the art I produce is not necessarily what most people would call art, but once you discover someone like David Nash, who made structures out of wood, and he wasn't sure that it was art to start with, but he became very confident it was. So the fact that he could produce so much stuff that I think a lot of people would question as to whether it's art, and he felt reassured as he went through it that he was an artist and he was producing art, then that helped me think, well, if he can think that's art, I can think what I do is art. I think, dwelling on how I do use my day, that I do separate these things, that I do sort of reward myself with creative periods and intersperse that with periods of implementation. The rooting up of the weeds is really quite boring and heavy duty, but if I've done a spate of that, then I'll feel that it's about time that I did something which I could enjoy. When Dad died, I inherited some farmland, and it was in Dorset, which is a couple 100 miles from where I was living, and so initially I couldn't do anything much with it other than allow the tenancies that are applied to it to roll forward. I definitely felt uncomfortable that I was managing some inherited land without knowing much about what was happening day to day, and it was getting to a stage at work where options to retire early were cropping up. I knew what I wanted to do was to lay some hedges, so I explored the options for learning how to lay hedges, and you could learn to lay a hedge in a couple of days at the most, but I found a course that took a whole year to learn to lay hedges and to learn about habitat management and all kinds of things that would be agricultural land management.
What was the name of that course?
It was called Countryside Management. I had some land, I had the experience of being a kid on a farm, so I knew an awful lot about what happens. A lot had changed in the meantime. It was a time when more money was being put into restoring habitats than producing greater yields of crops. So it was a good time actually to involve yourself with some stewardships which were sort of funding for the work I would end up doing. When I was at school, I enjoyed art, I loved art. It kind of got squeezed out by the focus on mathematics, although there is quite a bit about mathematics. The attraction to mathematics is not that far from being interested in shape. So if it's geometry or algebra, there's shapes involved. In handling the materials that I would choose to find myself handling in hedge laying or coppicing, I developed some dexterity with bill hooks and saws and chainsaws, and it became second nature to mess around with bits of wood. Last year, Elizabeth Fortescue died, and she was very much an encouraging source for me. She was a very accomplished artist, and she was very giving, and she would share what she knows. But in the main, what I got from Elizabeth was lots of encouragement. So she was like a tribal elder in the context you're speaking of, and gave me lots of moral support without me thinking I need some moral support. At a point in time when I'd been exploring my artistic drive for a while, she chose to put some of my things in her exhibition. That's where it really came home to me that she was really giving me a reinforcing feedback.
When we have the implementer mindset, the idea that magical synchronicities will happen if you just let go and surrender to the universe is quite at odds with that mindset.
Yeah, but it makes me think that total separation isn't that helpful, because if that synchronicity is going to be the thing that triggers something new, it means that while you're busily implementing, if you're just focused on that, you might miss it. I find that relatively easy. I'm daydreaming all the time when I'm implementing. Once I know that I'm on a path that's prescribed, I don't waste any time thinking about, is this worth doing, or is it the best way to do it? I just pursue it.
The very final pages are about magic. The first rule of magic is self-containment, it says. You must hold your intention within yourself, stoking it with power. Only then will you be able to manifest what you desire. The idea of manifesting what you desire is like a magical equivalent of implementing what you plan.
Right. Yeah.
As much as there's all of this focus on surrendering or relinquishing control, there is also a focus on a lot of very conscious control, like boundary setting, putting the walls up in the walled garden to protect the seedlings. And the people who will be skeptical and be like, that's not art, or that's not the way to do things, they're like the deer or the rabbits, perhaps. In her way of thinking about things, there is already a kind of bringing together of the two. Here's a plan to be creative. You need to implement this plan.
Yeah.
That's also there.
Yeah. Well, the whole book is such a implementation guide,
Yeah.
it seems. I seem to accept a lot of those thoughts.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. You're on the artist's way.
Yeah.
So through your experience, you agree with a lot of what she's saying. In her most condensed explanation of what she's saying, she'll say things like, we undertake certain spiritual exercises to achieve alignment with the creative energy of the universe. So she says things like that, and that's supposed to encapsulate the fundamental reality of all of the other particular things she's saying.
Yeah,
Which you agree with all of those things.
Yeah, but that's like a foreign language.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so if I were to...
If you were to start with that, I'd be saying, well, what else could we talk about?
Yeah, exactly. Which is how it starts.
Yeah, okay.
So,
Hello. This seems like something worth getting some footage of, doesn't it?
Yeah, getting at the crucial stage now where I can only reach it from the inside, so it's a bit tricky.
Would you call this pruning?
It's pruning, and really I'm just teasing this growing multiple apple into a harmonious shape, a dome,
Yeah.
and obviously it wants to go upright, so it's fighting me all the time. But I'm wanting it to just make a dome, and it'll give in eventually.
Have you pruned it previously?
Oh yeah, every year. Every year it gets a little bit of TLC, and sometimes it involves a bit of willow weaving to like strap stems together to bring it into the arch bit. You're getting there.
Here's a book of John's on David Nash, and in it there's this account of an ash dome. Nash notes that some people were discomforted by the ash dome and the controlling, interfering nature of his process. This is interesting, he reflects, given that the material and processes involved in the ash dome are essentially the same as those deployed in making and sustaining a hedge. Reflecting on the environmental movement in the 1970s, Nash notes that it was split between a belief that the human being is an alien parasite and that nature would be better off without us, and a conviction that we are an essential part of holistic nature, if we can work with it rather than attempting to dominate or conquer it. As we've just heard, John has always loved geometry, and he sees that love as a kind of bridge between his past life, where he studied maths and then implemented plans for 3M, and the life that we witness through Into the Field. Intriguingly, Nash also engaged eagerly with maths, algebra, and geometry as a child at primary school. And he asserts in this book that the simple gesture of putting crudely carved geometrical forms into a natural environment was prompted by the idea that geometry could offer a way of understanding nature, gravity, space, and time. Momentarily, you'll witness what John makes of that claim by the artist who inspired his Globe Theatre. We'll also see how he responds to these two quotations from Nash, which are very much related to the evolving themes of Into the Field. Number 1. The Japanese Zen artist Senge represents the movement from spirit to material through action by overlapping a circle, spirit, with a triangle, action, which in turn is overlapped by a square, representative of material. And finally, according to Plato, for whom reincarnation was a reality, our experience as non-material beings between successive material incarnations is geometric. Nash concludes his book with this paraphrase of Plato. Contained within us is a geometrical essence, and thus when we see these shapes, we recognize them instantly, even if subliminally. Final sentence of the book. These are universal forms.
In your David Nash book, which we've had to put inside because it's raining,
Yeah.
the ash dome, which was planted in 1977,
Yeah.
was the main inspiration for the Globe Theatre, which is
was.
behind you.
It was.
Did you know that the first 22 saplings that he planted were eaten by rabbits?
No. Or if I did know, I've forgotten. But
I think it was
that
rabbits.
sounds pretty natural. By a technique of scoring into the bark, he would encourage those trees not to grow up straight, which they naturally would have done, but to twist into something approximating to a dome. He's been very brutal in his treatment of that bark in order to get some very unnatural shapes. And therefore, I'm not surprised that some people are disquieted by the experience of seeing all those distorted trees. Rather than do anything clever with cutting into bark, I was always going to train them into a dome shape using hazel straps and willow weaving to bind it together, and in the end the crabapple trees themselves would interweave at the top. And we're nearly there.
Yeah.
We're nearly there. It's come on quite well.
There's two parts to this question. Do you love nature?
Yes.
Does nature love you back?
Some of the time it's pretty harsh, frankly. But if you put that to one side, we wouldn't be here if there wasn't nature. So it's pretty generous too. So I've got no problems with nature.
You've got no problems with nature, and nature has no problems with you? Or
I think nature might react a little bit to me from time to time.
do those trees like you?
Well, the ones I've planted, yes.
Yeah.
I try and keep the plants healthy by making sure that they don't get into a thicket. So I cut the inside, that otherwise it'd be shaded out, and I cut the outside so that doesn't grow away from the shape I want, and I leave some at the top to interweave with each other so I can carry on making my dough. So I am pruning for health and shape. Every time I make a piece of land art, there is the opportunity, in the case of a living piece of land art, to find yourself burdened with having to manage it on an ongoing basis. And it's actually quite fulfilling to do. As you notice with Lynn's reaction to it, inside that space is a very different feel from outside that space, and it's kind of special, so it's worth the effort. The fascination I have, I suppose, with geometry and algebra is that they are sort of algorithms, models for groping with everything that happens that's otherwise chaotic.
It's part of the art to have people witness, and before witnessing, to visualize, to conceive of an intended form.
I definitely don't find myself doing that. I don't find myself encouraging people to look beyond what's immediately obvious to them. And I don't know if that's good or bad.
The war table's gone, doesn't matter.
True. Go on.
Gardening is a hobby I often assign to creativity students. When someone is panicked halfway through across the bridge into a new life, repotting plants into larger and better containers quite literally grounds that person and gives him or her a sense of expansion. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think some of the things with gardening is when you're gardening, you're not doing anything else. So it's a physical thing, but your brain is free.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that then means that your brain can be just enjoying what you're doing, relaxing, and once you do all of those things, then more thoughts come in, more creative things come in. I used to find, not with gardening, but when I used to first go for my daily walk, I found on my daily walk was when I had any creative ideas.
Was that a surprise? So
It was a surprise.
You were taking the walk for exercise.
I was taking the walk for exercise, but that was the time when I think, because it was a basic thing, all you could do is walk.
Yeah.
Your head can be thinking totally different things.
Does my presence on the walk make that happen less?
This was way back when
Yeah.
I was still working. So that was my time by myself. I think now I get a lot more time by myself. I haven't got the constricts of work or anything like that. So I have lots of time by myself. And so lots of other things give me that same time to think
Yeah.
creatively.
Me neither, temporarily. So the walk has now become the connection.
Yes.
As opposed to the isolation.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's really interesting because only slightly earlier she talks about both walking and the body. Walking is
It's a very physical, it's
a
just
physical thing.
Yeah, it's a purely physical, and your body does it without thinking.
Yeah, she has a distinction between the logic brain, which she says is related to survival, and the artist brain, which is where connections are made, patterns are discovered, and that's what we want to be connecting with. And a lot of the thinking that happens when we're not on the walk gets in the way of creativity.
Yeah.
The passage about walking here is in a subsection of recovering a sense of autonomy called the Zen of Sports. And she says most blocked creatives are cerebral beings. In order to effect a real recovery, because that's the whole thing is like about creative recovery.
Yeah, okay.
In order to effect a real recovery, one that lasts, we need to move out of the head and into the body of work. To do this, we must first of all move into the body. And she talks about yoga and meditation. We need enough energy to raise a strong signal. It's a metaphor that she uses. It's like you're sending out a signal to receive inspiration.
Right.
This is where walking comes in. What we are after here is a moving meditation. This means one where the act of motion puts us into the now and helps us to stop spinning. So that's crucial, that what you're just describing from your experience is in the penultimate chapter. We're working backwards.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. Well, I used to find as well that with the walking, and it does happen now, is that you start to absorb some of the things around you.
Yeah.
Because you're not distracted, you're not just trying to get somewhere, you're purely out to walk. So you start noticing trees or anything in nature, really, and a bit like we do now when we're out walking. You notice that there are changes in the seasons, even. You notice new plants that are now flowering, all those sorts of things. And I think all of those things are quite calming. So that all helps, but it does make you just, start noticing things. And actually noticing things is quite a big part of art, really. You've got to see things. So a bit like we had the conversation about the sea. You need to see and just notice those things, even if you don't actually do anything with it. It's just being aware of those things is all part of the walk for me.
And so you're talking there about the horizon line.
Yes, the changes that happen every day. Every day you look out there, it looks different. It's never just the sea and the sky. There are very big differences depending on the weather. And sometimes it will be very overcast and the sea will look really dark. And the sky might be looking brighter on the horizon because in the distance there is maybe sunlight, but above the actual sea you're looking at is dark. So you get those differences. And then in a different time of day or even another day or a different season, it's totally different. And sometimes the sea looks positively turquoise, say, because it's a lovely sunny day and the sky is blue and it's all beautiful.
Yeah, for me, I was wondering whether it might have something to do with kind of encapsulating the idea of where does one thing end and another thing begin, like the boundary between the sky and the sea.
Yeah.
And can you see it, and does it shift, and does it appear to be in one place and take one form at one moment?
Yeah.
So that's what I was thinking before, but then now we have this idea of it being different on different days.
Yes.
So that seems to be a crucial component of it too.
Yeah, that's why I stop and look at it every day, because I know that it's not going to be the same. It changes as you move along and you end up with lighter sea and darker sky and a bit in the middle where they're
Yeah, so what you mean?
same.
The line is less distinct from this perspective.
In the distance, the sea is a bit paler again, I think. There's a pale bit of sea that could easily be sky, but actually it's sea.
Easier to tell where the
Yeah.
sea ends and the sky begins today.
Really dark sea.
There's just so much more clarity today. Now you're going to help me. You're going to throw some balls at me.
Yep.
Thank you. Oh, you found it.
Pardon?
You found this.
Yeah, and those.
So we can do it, but also be sensible.
Yes, exactly.
This place at 6:30 is just magic.
It is, yeah.
And I disturbed a fox, I disturbed the deer, and it's just magic.
It really is.
But Finn, our dog, he We always say to him, it's your favourite place. He bounces in here, in the main field. He bounces because he feels, I'm sure he feels the energy. I'm sure he does, because there is, and there's a, did you know about the mushroom circle over there?
No.
There's, I have to show you because it's massive. And it's suddenly appearing now, and it's a magic circle.
Oh wow, okay. Well, we have to have a look at that.
Oh, you will. You've probably never seen it.
I haven't.
I don't know if Dad has.
We could collect him if you want.
Yeah. This is lovely, even in the winter, isn't it?
Oh yeah, well, there's always something. As long as you've got some structure, there's always something.
Oh yeah. Structures are important though, aren't they?
Are you going to join us to see the...
Yeah.
Mushroom ring? Absolutely.
Dad, could you hold this for a second?
Yeah.
I was saying, you know, we call this Finn's field because he almost gets a different energy in this field.
Does he?
It's really weird. When you let him off at the gate there, he runs and he jumps and it's whether or not he knows, because whenever we can't come in here, when we go past, he pulls to come in here.
Oh, look here.
Yeah, I know. Aren't they amazing? What are they?
Oh, I don't know what's going on.
No, nor do we.
Colour.
They are an amazing colour, aren't they? See, they're different ones here.
Very different.
But aren't these growing out of the cow dung?
Seems like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think they are. There it is, yep. It's amazing though, it's so prominent. And you stand in the middle. And it's our fairy ring. And you'd never noticed it before. What are these then?
Well, I don't know.
No. But we noticed this about 3 years ago, and it becomes more and more prominent now because we noticed it maybe a few weeks ago that it was beginning to really show up.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, I think it's magic, isn't it? What creates it? Why? Why a circle?
These look like the fruit of a fungus, so I think it's just something that started there and spread out. But for some reason,
Do you? Why would it go in a circle?
well, it just grows.
Oh, I see.
There's something weird about the fact that the grass is finding it very nutritious
Yes,
where it's in flower currently.
yes.
Even with your best attempt to explain it away, there's still something weird.
There is. There is. It's definitely a magic field. It is. But that's what I say. I was saying to Dad, if you get Finn in here,
The dog.
his reaction is just so different in here to what it is anywhere else.
That's great. Little did I know that my Into the Field is magic.
Yeah, yeah.
You didn't
Yeah.
know that either then.
No.
I'm not sure I'm convinced yet that it's magic. I think it's natural. No, I've got to take that
Hardly
back.
anything
It's
is
not
natural.
natural.
No,
It's highly managed.
but you don't feel it's magic,
But I think this is a natural phenomenon that we're looking at.
right?
But I don't want to diminish it by saying it's
Oh no. You won't diminish it in my eyes
no.
because it was just lovely.
For you, it's magic.
Yeah,
What is natural? What is magic?
I know. What's the difference? Where's the divide?
Magic is supposed to be impossible, isn't it?
Depends what you're.
Well,
It's definitely not impossible.
no.
It's happening all the time.
That's pretty magic, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, except that when you understand the science of it, and therefore it's not magical at all. But
Wait,
it's fantastic.
We have to talk about the definition of magic eventually, don't we? We're just talking about nature.
Yeah.
What do you think creativity is?
It's an urge, and I suppose it's an output. So it's an urge to produce things that are not already in existence, and the output is what you get as a result of it.
That's a good answer, I think. Her answer is the relationship between a human being and the mysteries of inspiration.
Ooh. Okay. Yeah.
Seems like the kind of thing that a book called Big Magic would say creativity is.
Yeah.
Okay, and then creative living defined. This, I believe, is the central question upon which all creative living hinges. Do you have the courage to bring forth the treasures that are hidden within you?
Yeah. Well, you've got to put something out there. You've got to be brave enough to do something that others might criticise.
Yeah, exactly. Courage is going to be key. She says, I happen to believe that we are all walking repositories of buried treasure. This is very similar to the idea in The Artist Way
Yeah.
about everyone being creative.
Yeah.
I believe This is one of the oldest and most generous tricks the universe plays on us human beings, both for its own amusement and for ours. The universe buries strange jewels deep within us all, and then stands back to see if we can find them.
I'm not sure it's quite so preordained as that.
She's giving the universe agency. It might be a metaphor, but she's saying the universe has hidden jewels inside people.
But it's only like a narrative of how to explain the fact that everybody's got something within them that could be drawn out. Whether or not it's preordained is perhaps neither here nor there.
Yeah, we could get too theological about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it could also be the case that it could show up in a quite different form than the preordained idea would suggest. So, I produced a Globe Theatre which is derived from Nash's Ash Dome.
Nash's Ashes.
Yeah, Ash's Nash Dome. But I don't know what would have happened if it hadn't had that prompt.
So in one sentence just here, she says, work with all your heart, because I promise if you show up for your work day after day after day, you might get lucky enough some random morning to burst right into bloom. So there's this bringing together of the idea that, there's the planning at the war table, perhaps.
Yeah.
And yet there's also this unexpected moment, this magical moment, perhaps, of suddenly giving birth to something, finding oneself blooming. So that's an interesting combination, I think.
I think my equivalent to that would be more to do with just carry on working with your materials, and if anything has the hint of interest about it in the materials you end up handling, put it to one side and come back to it. Because if it isn't obvious straight away what you want to do with it, later on you'll find something that you want to do with it. So a lot of my wooden structures come from pieces of wood that have been hanging around for a long time, and eventually it turns out that yes, I do need 3 fork-shaped branches to do the thing that's just occurred to me I want to do, and so it happens that way. So it's a kind of blossoming that comes from enabling this blossoming to happen just because you've kind of casually planned to have a lot of stuff around, which leads to a very, very untidy life, frankly.
But the untidiness is perhaps essential to those particular bloomings eventually.
Yeah, we're going to say justified, yeah.
The good trickster knows that if he cheerfully tosses a ball out into the cosmos, that ball will be thrown back at him. It might be thrown back really hard, or it might be thrown back really crooked, or it might be thrown back in a cartoonish hail of missiles, or it might not be thrown back until the middle of next year. But that ball will eventually be thrown back. The trickster waits for the ball to return, catches it however it arrives, and then tosses it back out there into the void again, just to see what will happen. And he loves doing it, because the trickster, in all his cleverness, understands the one great cosmic truth that the martyr, in all his seriousness, can never grasp. It's all just a game. A big, freaky, wonderful game. Which is fine, because the trickster likes freaky. Freaky is his natural environment. The martyr hates freaky. The martyr wants to kill freaky, and in doing so, he all too often ends up killing himself. In order to let go of addiction to creative suffering, you must reject the way of the martyr and embrace the way of the trickster. We all have a bit of trickster in us, and we all have a bit of martyr in us. Okay, some of us have a lot of martyr in us, but at some point in your creative journey, you will have to make a decision about which camp you wish to belong to, and therefore, which parts of yourself to nourish, cultivate, and bring into being. Choose carefully. As my friend, the radio personality Caroline Casey always says, better a trickster than a martyr be. What's the difference between a trickster and a martyr? Here's a quick primer.
Martyr energy is dark, solemn, macho, hierarchical, fundamentalist, austere, unforgiving, and profoundly rigid. Trickster energy is light, sly, transgender, transgressive, animist, seditious, primal, and endlessly shapeshifting. Martyr says, I will sacrifice everything to fight this unwinnable war, even if it means being crushed to death under a wheel of torment. Trickster says, okay, you enjoy that. As for me, I'll be over here in this corner running a successful little black market operation on the side of your unwinnable war. Martyr says life is pain. Trickster says life is interesting. Martyr says the system is rigged against all that is good and sacred. Trickster says there is no system, everything is good, and nothing is sacred. Martyr says nobody will ever understand me. Trickster says pick a card, any card. Martyr says the world can never be solved. Trickster says perhaps not, but it can be gained. Martyr says through my torment the truth shall be revealed. Trickster says I didn't come here to suffer, pal. Martyr says death before dishonor. Trickster says let's make a deal. Martyr always ends up dead in a heap of broken glory, while Trickster trots off to enjoy another day. Well, now that the Trickster's trotted off, it strikes me that I could do with some help from someone who has the discipline to work day in, day out at his table. Even Gilbert shares, most of my writing life consists of nothing more than unglamorous, disciplined labor. I sit at my desk and I work like a farmer, and that's how it gets done. Most of it is not fairy dust in the least. Work like a farmer, she says, but she also promises, if you show up for your work day after day after day, you just might get lucky enough some random morning to burst right into bloom. The chapter of Big Magic that resonates with me the most is called A Good Trickster Move, and it's about a friend of Elizabeth Gilbert's called Brené Brown, the author of Daring Greatly and other works on human vulnerability, a favorite author of mine. Brené writes wonderful books, but they don't come easily for her. She sweats and struggles and suffers throughout the writing process and always has. But recently, I, Elizabeth Gilbert, introduced Brené to this idea that creativity is for tricksters, not for martyrs. It was an idea she'd never heard before. As Brené explains, hey, I come from a background in academia, which is deeply entrenched in martyrdom. I, Simon, can verify. As in, you must labor and suffer for years in solitude to produce work that only 4 people will ever read. I labored for years on a PhD thesis on George Eliot and Spinoza, and presently not even I have access to the fruits of that labor. Long story, perhaps for a future video. Right now, though, we're back at the war table, and the reason is I have an intention, which I want to commit to paper. I have an intention to publish 3 non-academic books in 2021, and to compose those 3 serious, though non-academic books with trickster energy, following the example of Brené Brown, who was following the advice of Elizabeth Gilbert. To wrap up today's episode, I'm going to resurrect and recruit our hard-working at the war table friend just here, and together we will reenact the breakthrough that occurred when Brené Brown tuned into the possibility of writing from a place of trickster energy. But first, I'm going to turn to the war table and make a formal commitment to composing those 3 books. For her last book, Brené tried something new, a super cunning trickster move of the highest order.
She enlisted 2 trusted colleagues to join her at a beach house in Galveston to help her finish her book, which was under serious deadline. She asked them to sit there on the couch and take detailed notes while she told them stories about the subject of her book. After each story, she would grab their notes, run into the other room, shut the door, and write down exactly what she had just told them while they waited patiently in the living room. Thus, Brené was able to capture the natural tone of her own speaking voice on the page, much the way the poet Ruth Stone figured out how to capture poems as they moved through her. Then Brené would dash back into the living room and read aloud what she had just written. Her colleagues would help her to tease out the narrative even further by asking her to explain herself with new anecdotes and stories as again they took notes, and again Brené would grab those notes and go transcribe the stories. Thank you. By setting a trickster trap for her own storytelling, Brené figured out how to catch her own tiger by the tail. Ridiculous, right? Mind you, Gilbert concludes her chapter. This was not a book of comedy that Brené was writing. This was a book about vulnerability, failure, anxiety, despair, and hard-earned emotional resilience. To some extent, all 3 of the books which I intend to publish in 2021 could be described in that manner. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you in advance for the help that you are giving me with these writing projects. We are rollicking on Into the Field, and through rollicking with me, you're helping me to achieve my goals in something like the spirit embodied by Brené Brown. Her book came out on the page just as deep and serious as it needed to be. It's just that she had a good time writing it, because she finally figured out how to game the system. In so doing, she finally accessed her own abundant source of big magic. That's how a trickster gets the job done. Lightly. Lightly. Ever lightly. Thank you.